"Get out of my house!" Rain hammered the marble steps in sheets, so heavy the porch lights blurred into halos. Harper stood at the top of the staircase in her gala dress, diamonds catching the light with every furious breath. One arm pointed at the small shape, pressed behind a drenched potted fern. The child's knees were raw from cold. Her hair was plastered flat against her skull. One fist clutched a stuffed rabbit with a single ear, the other ear long since lost to some other night, some other emergency nobody had bothered to remember. "You know the rules," Harper said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It had the kind of calm that came from never once being told no. She doesn't belong here. Marta came running from the back of the house, coat forgotten, hair wild, breath ragged from sprinting the length of the service hall. "Please, Miss Harper, she's 3. She'll get sick out here." "She should not be here at all," Harper said. "Tonight of all nights. I can take her to the kitchen. She'll be quiet. Nobody will even know." "Somebody already knows," Harper said, and something in the way she said it made Marta's stomach drop, though she couldn't have said why. Not yet. "Bring her inside," Marta begged, stepping closer, hands out like she might physically pull Lucia back through the door by will alone. Harper opened the front door herself, a click of heels on marble, a cold gust that smelled of ozone and wet stone, one hard push, and Lucia stumbled backward off the top step into the rain. The door shut behind her with a sound too soft for what it meant. Lightning caught the small shape slumped against the iron gate at the end of the drive before the dark swallowed her again. Marta lunged for the door handle. Harper's hand closed around her wrist like a clamp, nails biting crescents into skin. "You will control your child," Harper said, "or I will." "She is not mine to control," Marta said, before she could stop herself. "She is mine to protect." Something flickered behind Harper's eyes at that. Not confusion, recognition, gone before Marta could read it. Upstairs, in the ballroom that had been full of clinking glasses and violin music 20 minutes earlier, something cracked. Glass, not thunder. A scream followed, high and short, and then the sound of the chandelier letting go all at once. Crystal, raining down in a spray that caught the light like falling ice. The gala dissolved into shouting, running staff, waiters dropping trays, and guests shoving toward the exits in confusion nobody would be able to explain later. In that one spinning second, with every eye in the house pulled toward the ballroom, Marta tore her wrist free and ran. She didn't stop at the door. She went through it, into rain that hit her like something thrown rather than fallen, down the marble steps 2 at a time, her shoes slipping on wet stone. She called Lucia's name into the storm and heard nothing back but the wind moving through the hedges. At the gate there was no child, only puddles, and a trail of small muddy footprints leading away down the service road toward the tree line, growing fainter with every yard until they simply stopped at the edge of the woods, swallowed by grass gone dark with rain. Marta fell to her knees in the mud. For a moment, the only thing in the world was the torn ear of a stuffed rabbit, half buried, glinting once in a flash of lightning before the wind took it and it vanished into the dark. She reached for it and came up with nothing but wet grass. Headlights swept the drive. A car had pulled up at the gate, engine idling, and a man stepped out into the rain like he'd been waiting all night for exactly this. He wore a soaked coat that had clearly seen worse weather than tonight, and he moved without hurry, the way people move when hurrying has stopped being useful. "Where is she?" he asked. "Who are you?" Marta's voice cracked on the last word. He reached into his coat and held something up between 2 fingers. A rabbit's ear, the other one. It had been sitting in his pocket since before this night had even started. "You should not have hidden her this long," he said. His name was Daniel, though he didn't offer it right away. He crouched instead, scanning the tree line with the focus of a man reading a map only he could see, and then he looked past Marta toward the house, toward Harper standing framed in the open front door, like a woman already rehearsing the version of tonight she planned to tell people. "We don't have long," he said. "Whoever moved her will want to be gone before anyone starts asking why a 3-year-old vanished from a billionaire's front lawn in a storm." "Moved her? You think someone took her?" "I think somebody's been waiting for a night exactly like this one," Daniel said. "A storm loud enough to cover a scream, a house full of witnesses too drunk or too polite to look twice, and a woman inside who wanted her gone before her fiancé came downstairs." Marta stared at him. Rain ran down the back of her collar, but she barely felt it anymore. "Tell me who you are. Tell me who Lucia is," he said. "Really. From the beginning. We don't have time for you to decide how much you trust me." Marta had never told anyone the full truth. Not the neighbors who assumed Lucia was her own, not the other staff who'd stopped asking questions 2 years ago because a maid with a daughter was the least interesting story in a house like this one. She had built a life around never once saying the sentence out loud. She said it now, kneeling in the mud with rain running into her eyes. 3 years ago, a woman put a baby in my arms in a hospital corridor and made me promise one thing, Marta said. "Don't let anyone erase her." She said a name before she stopped being able to say anything else. Richard Devlin. She said Lucia was his daughter and that he never knew she'd been born because someone paid the mother to disappear quietly before he could find out. Daniel didn't look surprised. That, more than anything he'd said so far, frightened Marta. "You knew," she said. "I've been looking for that child for a year," Daniel said. "I work for her mother's family. When she died, they hired me to find out what had happened to the baby. Everyone in that hospital swore never existed. I found records, I found a payment, I found a house." He looked up at the estate behind them, windows lit gold against the storm. "I found this house 3 weeks ago. I've been watching it since, waiting for proof she was really here." "Proof," Marta repeated. "The rabbit's ear. I found the first one caught in a hedge outside the service gate 2 weeks ago," Daniel said. "Somebody else has been watching this house too. Somebody closer than me." They searched the grounds together, while the gala behind them dissolved further into confusion, security fanning out to manage stunned guests. Instead of a missing child nobody upstairs had noticed was gone. A groundskeeper, cornered by Daniel's calm and specific questions, remembered a woman leaving through the service gate less than an hour earlier with a bundle in her arms, waved through by a guard who hadn't asked what was under the blanket, because the instruction to let her pass had come from inside the house itself. "From who?" Marta asked. The groundskeeper wouldn't say. He didn't have to. His eyes went to the lit window on the second floor, where Harper's private study looked out over the drive. They found the car 2 streets over, parked under a dead street lamp, engine cold, doors unlocked as if whoever left it hadn't planned on needing it again tonight. A blanket lay crumpled in the back seat, still faintly warm, and there, curled in the gap between the car and the curb where she'd apparently been set down and told to wait, was Lucia, soaked through, shivering, silent in the particular way children go silent when they've cried themselves past the point where crying does anything. Marta scooped her up before her knees had even finished bending, pressed her face into wet hair that smelled of rain and cold metal, and held on so hard Lucia made a small sound of protest. "I'm here," Marta said into her hair, over and over, like a spell that might undo the last hour if she said it enough times. "I'm here, I'm here." Lucia's small hand found the collar of Marta's coat and gripped it the way she always did when she was frightened, fingers curled so tight the knuckles went white. She didn't cry. She just held on and watched Daniel over Marta's shoulder with the wary, assessing look of a child who has learned that new adults on a night like this one are not always good news. "She's hypothermic," Daniel said, feeling for Lucia's pulse at her wrist with 2 fingers, gentle despite the urgency in his voice. We need to get her warm before anything else. But Marta, ask her what happened. Now, while it's fresh, before she's warm enough to want to forget it." Marta pulled back just far enough to look at her daughter's face. "Baby, who put you in the car?" Lucia's lip trembled. "The pretty lady," she whispered. "What did she say to you?" Lucia's small hand tightened further on the coat collar. She looked past Marta, toward the house, toward the golden windows where the storm had not yet reached. "She said I'm not her problem anymore," Lucia said. "She said Daddy can't know." The word landed in the rain, like something dropped from a great height. "Daddy!" Marta went completely still. Daniel's jaw tightened, and for the first time since he'd stepped out of the car, something like anger moved across his face. "She knows," Marta said. "Harper knows. She's known this whole time." "Not just known," Daniel said quietly. "She's been managing it. The ear in the hedge wasn't an accident, Marta. Somebody's been leaving proof of Lucia's existence for someone to find, and I don't think it was you." Back at the estate, the storm hadn't let up, and neither had the shaken remains of the gala. Guests herded into the front hall, while staff swept broken crystal and murmured about insurance and headlines. Daniel walked in first, coat streaming water onto the marble, with Marta behind him carrying Lucia wrapped in his jacket, the child's eyes half closed now against his shoulder from exhaustion rather than sleep. Harper met them at the top of the stairs. Her composure had already begun sliding back into its careful shape, the mask reassembling itself piece by piece, the way it must have 100 times before tonight. "You found her," Harper said. Her tone suggested relief. Her eyes suggested arithmetic. "How fortunate. I was about to call for help." "You put her out there," Marta said. Her voice didn't shake this time. 3 years of silence had burned off somewhere between the hedge and the car, and what was left underneath was steadier than she'd expected. "I don't know what you think you saw," Harper said, "but a hysterical maid and a stranger who wandered in off the street are not exactly reliable witnesses." "I'm not a stranger," Daniel said. "I've been documenting this house for 3 weeks. Cameras at the gate. A recorder on the guard you paid to look the other way an hour ago." He held up his phone, screen glowing in the dim hall. "Would you like to hear it, or would you rather I play it for Richard?" Harper's eyes flicked, just once, toward the top of the stairs, where a shape had appeared in the doorway of the private study. Richard Devlin, still in his tuxedo jacket, tie loosened, face unreadable in the low light. He must have come down at the sound of the chandelier and stopped somewhere on the landing, close enough to hear the last several sentences without anyone noticing him there. "His?" he said. The word dropped into the hall, and nobody moved. Even the staff sweeping glass in the ballroom doorway went still. Harper turned toward him, and for the first time all night, she had nothing already prepared to say. Richard came down the remaining stairs slowly, one hand trailing the banister as though he needed it more than usual. He stopped in front of Marta and looked, really looked, at the small face pressed into Daniel's jacket, at the shape of a nose and a stubborn chin that belonged to a woman he hadn't let himself think about in 3 years, a woman from a summer he'd spent trying very hard to forget, because remembering her had started to feel like grief with nowhere to go. "Her name is Lucia," Marta said quietly, watching his face for the first crack in it. "Her mother asked me to keep her safe, from people who'd rather she never existed at all." "How long have you known?" Richard asked. He wasn't looking at Marta when he said it. "It doesn't matter now," Harper said, too fast, the words tumbling out ahead of whatever plan she'd been building since the ballroom chandelier fell. "It matters to me," Richard said, and for the first time that night, his voice had an edge in it that made even the staff by the ballroom door stop pretending not to listen. "How long, Harper?" "I was protecting us," Harper said, "protecting everything we've built. Do you have any idea what a scandal like this would do? A maid's daughter, an affair nobody can verify, tabloids circling before we've even set a wedding date. "You knew she was mine," Richard said, "and instead of telling me, you had her carried off my own property in a storm." "I had her relocated," Harper snapped, composure finally slipping all the way off. "Somewhere safe, somewhere quiet, until we could handle it properly, with lawyers, with a plan, not with some maid making a scene on the front steps." "She was left in a parking lot 2 streets from here," Daniel said, "alone, in the rain, a 3-year-old. Harper's mouth opened and nothing came out. Security had already begun ushering the last of the stunned guests out into the rain, umbrellas snapping open in the drive, engines starting one after another down the length of the driveway. Harper stood alone near the top of her own staircase, the ring on her hand, suddenly the smallest and least important thing in the room, her carefully built version of tonight, collapsing in real time in front of the one person she'd built it for. Richard crossed the last few feet to stand in front of Marta and reached out, hesitant in a way that didn't match anything else about him, and touched Lucia's small hand where it still gripped the collar of Daniel's jacket. Lucia stirred, blinked up at him with heavy eyes, and didn't pull away. Something in her small, tired face seemed to recognize him without knowing why, the way children sometimes do. "I'm not going anywhere," Marta said, holding her ground even now, even with the man who owned the house standing 3 feet away. "Not this time, not without her." "Neither am I," Richard said. He looked past Marta at Harper one last time, and whatever had existed between them for the past 2 years seemed to fold up quietly and leave the room on its own, without either of them needing to say the words that would make it official. Harper didn't argue. She simply turned and walked back up the stairs alone, heels loud on the marble in a house that no longer felt entirely hers. Outside, the storm had already started breaking apart into a thin, steady rain, the kind that comes after the worst of it has passed. Lucia had fallen fully asleep against Daniel's shoulder somewhere in the last few minutes, one hand still closed loosely around the collar of his jacket, the other curled empty at her side where a stuffed rabbit with one ear should have been. Marta reached into her own pocket and found it there, where she'd tucked it without remembering doing so, damp but whole enough. She pressed it gently into Lucia's open hand, and small fingers closed around it in her sleep, the way they always had, the way they always would.